a fried-out combi on a hippie trailhead full of zombies. I met a strange lady, she made me nervous. She took me in and gave me breakfast. And she said, do you come from a land down under? Where women go.
Welcome to the 70s versus the 80s, my fellow retro pop culture loving babies.
You better run, you better take.
If you ever bought 12 compact discs for 1 penny from Columbia House, but you later defaulted on that contract, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, everybody. This is Wolfman Mike on the mic. And I can talk Air Jordans all night. I can talk Chuck Taylors all night. But I cannot talk Reebok pumps all night because, I mean, it's been 30 years. They got to be more leaky than the air shocks on your 1986 Pontiac Fiero by now. Am I right? And as always, I am joined by Spunky Comstock himself. He's pretty fly for a bra guy. It's Brian. And in case you can't remember what Brian sounds like, he sounds a little something like this.
As a Minnesota dad, I buy white New Balance shoes just so that they can show the grass stains to show that you mow grass.
That's why Brian's been runner-up for most compelling co-host for 3 years running, folks. So what is today's show about? We have been waiting forever to talk about this subject. Can you believe it? The Air Jordan has turned 40 years old. And since we're the Versus show, we have to put it up against the Chuck Taylor. Which shoe is the most iconic shoe in the history of shoes? Which shoe is the most iconic fashion item in the history of fashion items? I mean, the Chuck Taylor is so iconic to us at the 70s and 80s that we have it on the cover of our podcast artwork. And then we have a huge second segment for you guys today. It's the Spotify game. You get to play along with us, and you'll probably beat us, and maybe you'll be just as shocked as we were, but we are picking the 70s and 80s artists. We are picking which ones are the most played today, this month, this year, this 2025. Maybe you'll beat us because we did really bad, or maybe you'll be just as shocked as we were. We were really shocked. I was completely shocked about which song was the most popular, so I'm going to end the show with it. So we have a lot to get to, so let's get to it.
Mike on the mic, Wolfman Mike. I'm a little concerned because it looked like in the main auditorium here at 70 vs. 80s Worldwide headquarters, you have like a fashion show runway set up. And I'm like, no, we're not going to ever talk fashion on this show. So I'm going to be drag kicking and screaming into this, or, maybe even, just let you do this solo. I mean, what were you thinking?
You don't think we're fashion orientated here? I was thinking, 40 years ago, one of the biggest iconic fashion items of the 70s and 80s just came to fruition when we were in high school, and it just took over in popularity and everything. And it's fashion, but it's also mixed with basketball, so we get that. It's just a weird combination of sports and fashion. Of course, we are talking about the iconic Air Jordans, which just burst onto the scene in 1985. We were in high school at the time. We're trying to figure out what shoes to wear for our in-house basketball team. Air Jordans were just everywhere. They were just kind of coming into our small third-tier suburb. You'd see people wearing them, and you just kind of see them coming down the hall. And you just kind of stand back. And some people had the white, red, and black ones, and some people had I really like the black and red ones. What are some of your memories about when they burst into the scene, Brian?
You didn't tell me we were going to be talking about shoes, about basketball shoes. Hell, I'm in. Let's talk about this.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we were on the same basketball team in 7th and 8th grade. I think you were on a shopping trip. We went out to, I think it was a Kokesh when those were still around. It was a sporting goods chain. I don't know if it was nationwide or just in Minnesota. I spent, and I think it was like $84. And this is back when I had a job that was like $5.21 an hour, but I was also in high school and it was the 80s. And so $85 wasn't all that much because you didn't have any other expenses. Hoping that these are these shoes, they've been advertised. Top of the line Converse, the top of the line at the time, Converse is going to make me a better basketball player. And yes, I still ended up playing on the in-house team. I didn't make the main team, so I guess they weren't as good as they could be. But let's talk shoes.
You chose the Converse over Air Jordans. Could it be because of this? I think you were influenced by this awesome commercial. Let's play this commercial. Everybody kind of says their names in it, so you can kind of tell who's singing, and you just got to hear it, folks. Let's go.
The Converse weapon, that's the shoe that's magic, do what he was born to do.
It may be so, but that's not all. They let Isaiah play like he's 10 feet tall.
For the kind of moves that never fail, the weapon's the choice of Kevin McHale.
The same is true for Mark Aguirre. When I wear weapons, I'm on fire.
Well, what can the weapons do for King? Well, I can do just about anything.
You already know what you did for me.
What?
I walked away with the MVP.
The Converse weapon, the #1 weapon in the NBA.
So as Jack Nicholson once said on a award show, with possible exception of Kevin McHale, he's the most famous person from Hibbing, Minnesota. And he's talking, of course, about Bob Dylan. But if Kevin McHale said buy Converse, as a Minnesotan, as a person who, a big fan of the University of Minnesota where he went, loving all things Minnesota, I had to buy the Converse.
People that don't know Kevin McHale, he was with Larry Bird and Robert Parrish at that famous front court. Kevin McHale, he's the one that looked like Herman Munster. So if you know what Herman Munster looked like.
If you don't know what Herman Munster looks like, he looks like Kevin McHale. If you don't know what Kevin McHale looks like, he looks like Herman Munster. Kevin McHale famously was in a couple episodes of Cheers where they got him off his game because he was counting the bolts at Boston Garden.
So, Brian, we are the 70s versus the 80s. We like to go versus here. But this puts us in a big quandary because I asked all the AI, I asked them all, what's the most iconic shoe in history? I didn't know if they were going to spit out the Roman sandal, but they all did spit out the Air Jordan. There's only a problem. A lot of them spit out Air Jordan as #2, and as #1, they had the Converse All-Stars, the Chuck Taylors. Now, these shoes, everybody knows these shoes. They're the canvas shoes with the rubber bumper. You can call them the generic shoe. And depending on where you grew up, I mean, when we were in the early 70s, we called them Converse All-Stars because that's what it says on the side of the shoe. I know in England, in the UK, they still call them All-Stars. Kind of going into the 80s, they started calling them Chuck Taylors because it also says Chuck Taylor on the side of the shoe. And then today, I think they're widely regarded as Chucks. What did you call them, Brian? Did you have a different name for them, or did you?
I call them the All-Stars. Interested in this, kind of delved into the story. Everyone kind of knows the Nike story, or probably does because it's a lot more recent. It started up in the 60s. Phil Knight and his track coach were trying to figure out ways to get a lightweight, all-terrain shoe, and his track coach used his wife's waffle iron to put these divots in the bottom and the rubber soles that work to get better traction and lightweight. I think it was on an episode we talked about Dr. Pepper and ads. The 70s and 80s were the greatest time for advertisements, and Nike played that well. They got that, like their logo and their shoe out in front of the populace, and they were from 1976 when they had their first ad to 1980. I think they went from barely any market share to half the market share. And we're all familiar with the Nike thing. We'll talk more about it later. But Converse has kind of an interesting story. I'm just going to go with the good parts of it because they have a lot of bankruptcies and issues with the Depression and bankruptcies, and ended up being actually bought out by Nike. They're founded by Marquis Mills Converse in 1908 in Massachusetts as the Converse Rubber Shoe Company, but they also made some non-footwear items like automotive tires back at that time. 1916, they started introducing a basketball shoe, and in 1917, the All-Star was introduced. So the All-Star has been around now for 108 years. Hence why AI might call it popular because obviously in 108 years, you can sell a lot of shoes.
Did that surprise you, Brian? Because before I started researching this, I always thought it was like a 1940s, 1950s shoe. So popular in the 40s and 50s.
Right. And I had kind of heard about the next thing, and I thought it was in the 50s and something like that. And then like when Kansas basketball is big, and there's an icon that wore it during a important performance that I'll get to, one of his most important performances. I'll let the audience fill in the rest of them later. In 1922, Charles H. Taylor, so I'm thinking he goes by Chuck, was a basketball player, and he walked into the Converse company complaining of sore feet. He didn't like their shoes. So not only did they take his criticism to heart and make the shoes better, he was given a job as a salesman and an ambassador for the Converse Shoe Company. And in 1932, they added his signature to the All-Star patch on him. So going back, it would have been 1932, prime Depression time, that they would have added the Chuck Taylor signature to the All-Star logo. So I guess you could call them, Chuck Taylors or Chuckies all the way back to 1932.
And I think he was just a semi-pro basketball player, I believe.
Well, yeah, this is back when they didn't have, they kind of like barnstormed around and had these semi-pro leagues before the NBA and all that was founded. The NBA all came after like World War II. The most famous wearing of Converse All-Stars would have been Wilt Chamberlain on the night that he scored 100 points. And so the greatest basketball performance of all time was Wilt Chamberlain. And if you ever look at the bottom, you kind of see there's a circle on him, and that's for people to pivot. Back in the olden days when you could establish a pivot foot and then you couldn't pick it up to do the Euro step and the gather step and whatever else they do now to be able to get away with 5 or 6 steps between dribbles.
So Wilt Chamberlain this is huge. He scored 100 points in Chuck Taylor's. The only problem is, did he really happen? Because there's no videotape. Nobody has a video record of him scoring the 100 points. That's a true story. There's a couple photos, I believe, but there's no video evidence.
Yeah, and there'd be the box score the next day, but it's like, yeah, could you go? You can't go back and verify that the box score was correct.
Here's my impression of the coach on the other team. Who's covering Wilt? Well, stay on him. I believe he's hot.
That was, I say, my favorite joke is like, who was guarding Wilt Chamberlain that night? And then they look at you like they're not sure, and you're like, nobody. So, in the 1970s, however, kind of having a stranglehold on the market, 70 to 80% of the basketball market until the 1970s, all of a sudden these different companies started coming into the arena, like Puma, Adidas, Reebok, and this little company we briefly touched on before, Nike.
Nike, who's basically a running shoe company. They started with Phil Knight.
Yeah, he's a track athlete.
I've read 3 books on Nike. 2 of them are just slander pieces, and one's a feel good. Phil Knight's story is kind of a feel good story about Nike. But basically, they were making shoes out of Japan, the Osaki Tigers, which now is basically ASICS. So ASICS shoes. And so if you look at the original Osaki Tigers and the original Nike Cortez from 1973, which we'll do an episode on, I'm sure, sometime, but they were basically the same shoes. And so he started bringing the Osaki Tigers over, and then he started getting in fights with the Japan guys. So then he started making his own shoes, and so he kind of ripped them off, but they were very popular. Like you said, the big campaign in the early 70s where Farrah Fawcett wore it on an episode of Charlie's Angels, and that was just huge. That's kind of when it went viral. If anything could go viral in the 70s, they really couldn't, but somehow we all got on the phone and started talking about each other about what Farrah Fawcett was wearing on her feet.
And Farrah Fawcett was involved about half of them.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I remember the first Nike ad never actually said Nike in it or anything. It just keep going. And then I think they showed the logo at the end with the swoosh, which was registered with the patent office in 1974. And that ad, the first main ad was in 1976. I said, Just Do It was coined in the summer of 88. So like when we were graduated in 88. And yes, we both, longtime listeners of the podcast, I know this is coming as a surprise too, but yes, we both did graduate.
I think I still got a couple credits that I have to pick up, but yeah. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, I'm going to take that back. And it's one of the top 5 campaigns of the 20th century by Advertising Age magazine is the Just Do It campaign. So Nike knows how to play the advertising game.
Yeah. When the Air Jordans came out, we had the Spike Lee, who was fresh off the...
Do the Right Thing.
Do the Right Thing. So talking about Just Do It, Spike Lee was off Do the Right Thing, his famous movie, and he started doing the Air Jordan commercials, and they were like little mini movies in himself. He kind of shot them in black and white, kind of like She's Gotta Have It, which was actually his first movie, his famous college art film. He played Mars Blackmon, the same character from She's Gotta Have It. And let's give that a little listen here. They were pretty iconic.
Yo, Mars Blackmon here with my main man, Michael Jordan. Yo, Mike, what makes you the best player in the universe? Is it the vicious stunts?
No, Mars.
Is it the haircut?
No, Mars.
Is it the shoes?
No, Mars.
Is it the extra long shorts?
No, Mars.
It's the shoes then, right? Money's gotta be the shoes. Shoes. You sure it's not the shoes?
I'm sure, Mars.
What about the shoes?
So, Brian, here we have two shoes. We have one, they're both named after a basketball player. One, I always say Wilt Chamberlain is the most dominating basketball player of all time, but I think Michael Jordan might be the most skilled basketball player of all time, perhaps the most popular basketball of all time. And then the other shoe is named after Chuck Taylor, whose name is very popular, is iconic, but I don't even know what the guy looks like.
Yeah, whiny semi-pro basketball player who had the balls to go complain directly to the company and supplied them with some money. Here, go sell the shoes for us. And
Chuck Taylor's was the official Olympic basketball shoe until the 1970s. They were the official USA Olympic basketball shoe all the way up until the 1970s.
Yeah, Converse had that iron grip on the market, 70-80%. That you played that ad earlier with like Dr. J and Magic Johnson, Kevin McHale, and then Larry Bird at the end, and that was kind of their last gasp or last grasp at trying to remain relevant. I don't know if their shoes were any better or any worse. I have to admit that I never bought a pair of Air Jordans. I never bought a pair of Nike basketball shoes. I never bought a pair of Nike anything footwear related except for softball cleats or baseball cleats when I couldn't find Converse ones anymore because I was a Converse. I kind of stayed loyal to Converse as long as I could. And then as a Minnesota dad, I buy white New Balance shoes just so that they can show the grass stains to show that you mow grass.
You can mow the grass with them, yeah.
And a funny story there is recently I was over at my dad's and I had my son with. And when we were going to all go, three of us were going to go outside at the same time, we got down to the landing where the shoes were, and there were 3 identical pairs of New Balance cross-training shoes. All of us have the exact same model number. We had to go by size to figure out whose is whose. So the Minnesota dad runs really strong through us, even though my son's not a dad.
Wow, that is the most dad shoe story I've ever heard. Yeah, and then speaking of non-dad shoes, so Converse Chuck Taylors, they're kind of iconic with punk rockers, with skateboarders. They became a very popular skateboarding shoe in the 70s, until Vans. It was either Vans or Chucks. And we're going to have Vans on a different episode. I'm guessing it'll probably be the Fast Times at Ridgemont High episode. But Vans... so Vans were skateboard shoe. Chuck Taylors were skateboard. They were punk rock. They were very counterculture shoes. Air Jordans were kind of the hip hop. Hip hop culture was huge with Air Jordans. So we got these two opposing shoes. But I think everybody's worn, besides Brian, who's never worn Nikes. I think everybody, when I was 5 years old, I got the black and white Chuck Taylors. Probably the most happiest I've ever been putting on a pair of shoes in my life. I had to go back and buy some leather black and white Chuck Taylors just a couple of years ago just to see if I, almost 50 years apart, just to see if I could relive that. And I love those shoes.
Different sizes though, right?
I buy a lot of barefoot shoes. So basically you can make Chuck Taylor and Vans into barefoot shoes because any shoes before the 1970s technology are kind of barefoot shoes. So I'll wear those a lot. And luckily those are my favorite fashion shoes. And then you got Air Jordans, which are always so expensive, too expensive. Chuck Taylors look the same year after year. When they got bought by Nike, they did kind of they made it a little bit lighter, but they still kind of have a very heavy sole to them. Well, I like Chuck Taylors because when you're walking in them, people go out, you can go out and spend a lot of money on hiking shoes, or you can go spend the $65 to $70 on Chuck Taylors. I think Chuck Taylors will do 99% of what those expensive hiking shoes do. I think Chuck Taylors are perfect. They're all around shoes. And then you got Air Jordans, which put out these beautiful works of art every year. They look like, I'm like, well, those look like somebody's wearing leather snails on their feet. I mean, they look like modern art. I really like the Air Jordan 11s. That's my second favorite pair besides the Air Jordan 1s. Do you remember the Air Jordan 11s? Of course you don't, Brian. You didn't wear Nikes.
Of course I don't.
Those are the ones that were patent. They look like wedding shoes, kind of mixed with basketball shoes. They kind of the shiny patent ones from Air Jordan 11s. I like those. Those were kind of cool. The Air Jordan 3s were kind of cool. They had the cement bottoms on them, the cement color. So yeah, so they're totally different shoes, but they're both iconic. Like I said, I looked them up on every list. A lot of them, Chuck Taylor's was the most iconic shoe ever. And then Meta, they picked the Meta AI. They picked Air Jordans 1, Chuck Taylor 2. So it was just, those are the two most iconic shoes ever, and totally different, totally diametrically opposed. You have any other final thoughts on that, Brian?
Yes, I do have another final important thought, because it's like, I was running down Nike. I haven't bought their shoes, but I never bought Air Jordans. I also never have bought the iconic Chuck Taylors. I hated them. They had no ankle support. I always got better. I got just basically high top Converse basketball shoes, but they weren't the Chuck Taylor autographed ones. So I've never had Chuckies. I've never had Nike Air Jordans.
You're not a hipster. That's what now the hipsters are wearing, the Chuck Taylors.
Yeah, I think you're gonna have to play the Beck's Loser underneath me, my vocals in this, because apparently I don't have any taste in footwear.
You got to go get yourself a pair of Chuck Taylors. They're so minimalist. You're just going to feel like they'll take you back to being a little kid, because there's nothing to them, and they're so comfortable. You can wear them anywhere. You can mow the grass with them. They got the little bumpers on them.
Oh, I can't lose my Minnesota dad street cred. So I got to keep buying the white New Balances.
All right. Oh, Brian.
Stock car flaming with the loser and the cruise control. Babies in Reno with the vitamin D. Got a couple of couches, sleep on the love seat. Someone came saying I'm insane to complain.
So, Mike, the reason that I left Converse and Nike is I went to New Balance, is that they made their shoes in the good old United States of America.
Okay, Brian, that's some great logic there. Use some really good logic there. But you know what? I don't care. We're supposed to have street cred on this show. We're supposed to be the cool 70s and 80s guys. And you got New Balance? New Balance, Brian? Really? The dad shoes? You could have these cool Chuck Taylor. I can't even say it. You could have these cool Chuck Taylor. You could look like you're skateboarding. Of course, you don't know how to skateboard because you're not cool, but you could look like you knew how to skateboard by wearing Chuck Taylors, or you could wear Air Jordans and pretend you're part of the hip-hop culture. Okay, that wouldn't work for you either, Brian. That would be a bad look for you too, Brian. Maybe you should just stick with the New Balance shoe, Brian. Who cares about our street cred? Just stick with those New Balance shoes. Our street cred's out the window anyways. We just did Pat Benatar and Blondie. We did Loggins and Messia. We have no more street cred, Brian. But I blame you for wearing those New Balance shoes. You know what? Don't you see that sign outside the 70s and 80s studio? No New Balance shoes. We got that giant sign out there. Brian, you just walk in. You're just walking all over our show, Brian. Why don't you just take your New Balance shoes and just walk all over our credibility, Brian? I tell you, Brian.
Having a production meeting on the air?
No, we ain't got money. I'm so in love with you, honey, and everything will bring a chain of love. And in the morning when I rise, you bring a tear of joy to my eyes and tell me everything's gonna be alright.
Mike, as I was walking down the long corridor to my small recording area here at 70s versus 80s podcast headquarters, I'm on the lower floors, I'm on the penthouse like you, saw that you had a boxing ring set up and a corner bell, and I'm just trying to figure out what was your thoughts behind that.
Yeah, Brian, I was thinking let's try something we haven't tried in a long time, or I don't think we've ever done it before. It's called the Spotify game. It's where we take these rock groups that are in the same weight class. We'll try to get them in the same weight class, have them fight it out. We're going to make a case for why one group will be more popular, and we're going by today, who gets the most listens on Spotify this month today as we record this. So we're both going to make our case, and we're both going to pick who we think's going to win, and then we're going to look it up because we have no idea. We haven't looked it up yet.
Going into it blind. So much unlike our usual podcasting, we're going into this blind.
Here we go.
All right, well, I have a matchup then I'd like to do.
Yeah, let's start out. Sounds like you had a little undercard for us.
We have an undercard. We have a very, very recent passing, Sam Moore of the soul group Sam and Dave, who performed as a group for 20 years from 1961 to 1981. So they, latter half of their career was prime 1970s versus 80s. So since that's an and group, a duo, let's go with a great duo from the 70s, maybe the most popular duo of the 70s until they're maybe passed by Hall & Oates. Loggins and Messina, we recently talked about Kenny Loggins with the whole yacht rock thing. So I think we should face off Loggins and Messina versus Sam and Dave, a little easy listening, country rockish precursor of yacht rock versus the great soul that permeated some of the Blues Brothers movie that we talked about in a previous episode. I mean, I think Loggins and Messina is definitely most known for Danny's song. I don't know if you have any other songs of theirs.
And it's all because your mama don't dance and your daddy don't rock and roll. Your mama don't dance and your daddy don't rock and roll. When evening rolls around and it's time to go to town, where do you go? To rock and roll.
Your Mama Don't Dance, and I think that was remade by a hair metal band. We might have to have Beardo in to verify that.
Didn't they have like a Winnie Pooh corner or Winnie and the Pooh song too? Pooh's Corner?
Something like that. Sam and Dave, Hold On, I'm Coming, Soul Man, which is a fantastic Mike's Misheard Lyrics thing that we talked about on the Blues Brothers episode. Soothe Me, which is in the Blues Brothers. It's a fantastic spot when they go through the lights and it's like to the beat of the song. They're like,
shit. What? Rollers. No. Yeah. Shit.
When the cop pulls out after him, that's the song Soothe Me. And then I Thank You, some fantastic soul from Sam and Dave. Sam and Dave might have a little bit of a push from Sam's recent passing, but Loggins and Messina might have a push from the whole yacht rock doc that we talked about in a previous episode. I'm going to lean toward Sam and Dave winning this one, but I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, Mike.
Let's refresh everybody. For the Sam and Dave, I had a segment here, what I like to call Mike's Misheard Lyric Minute. Their famous Blues Brothers song, Soul Man. When I was a little kid, I always heard it as I'm so mad. So let's play a little clip here and see why did I mishear it like that. And congratulations! Now you're going to always hear it that way. Now that I put that in your head.
Ever since the Blues Brothers episode, I've been hearing it that way.
So you're welcome. So that has been another episode of Mike's Misheard Lyric Minute. And so that's great, Brian, that you picked Sam and Dave, because I was thinking Loggins and Messina the whole way. I just think, Kenny Loggins is such a juggernaut. Even before he was big, I think he was big. So I'm going with Loggins and Messina. So let's look this up. Let's see who's got this match. And this is what do you think this is? A light middleweight round? Or or you think this is middleweight?
I was thinking this would be middleweight maybe, or maybe like a cruiserweight, kind of not the flyweights, but not heavyweight. And it's going to be a bloodbath, at least from my stats. I don't know but we're looking at Spotify monthly listeners. Loggins and Messina, 824,000 monthly listeners. Sam and Dave, 2.9 million.
Wow.
I think we maybe have misclassified Sam and Dave. Maybe we're overlooking that great soul music. Maybe everyone's so mad at us that we picked.
I'm so mad. That wasn't even close. And wow, I really thought Loggins and Messina had them there, but that was not even close.
It's kind of a blowout there. All right. Well, one of the things of the 70s was streaking. And my favorite streaking story is supposedly Yogi Berra, the great Yogi Berra, famous for his quips and quotes, was at a ball game with his kids, and there was a streaker during the middle of it. It was the 70s. And he gets home and he tells the story to his wife. There was a streaker at the ball game. And his wife said, well, do you know what sex they were? And Yogi Berra says, no, I couldn't tell. They had bags over their heads.
I always love that
one. So Ray Stevens kind of he made some of these kind of parody type songs, not on anywhere near on the plateau of like a Weird Al, but he had one called The Streak. He also was famous for Everything Is Beautiful, very early 70s, kind of that easily listening country or these parody songs. And I thought we'd match him up against Mac Davis. Mac Davis, to kind of tie him to our podcast, was a host of The Muppet Show in 1980. And he had a song come out that same year. It's Hard to Be Humble. kind of a song spoofing people's egos and stuff like that. So I think we're just going to go with this is going to be a flyweight. A lot of listeners might not know these people, but you'll maybe get a chance to hear a snippet of these songs and be like, oh yeah, I've heard that song. Ray Stevens versus Mac Davis. So I should say my thoughts before I go ahead and look at the monthly listeners so that I don't cheat.
Yeah, don't cheat. Go ahead.
I'm going to go with Ray Stevens. I'm going to put the power of the 70s up, beat the power of the 80s with streaking. I think people are more interested in listening to the streak and Ray Stevens than Mac Davis, even though hosting the Muppet Show is a pretty cool thing.
I'm going to agree with you. I'm going Ray Stevens, and I'm going all because of his song, The Streak. I think I know he's not a one-hit wonder, but I kind of call him a one-hit wonder. And I think it's going to be all on that one hit. So I'm going Ray Stevens.
All right. So Ray Stevens is 205,000 monthly listeners. And Mac Davis, this is hot off the presses here. Mac Davis has 177,000 monthly listeners. So Ray Stevens in the flyweight has advanced. Ooh. If you haven't listened to The Streak, listen to it. You kind of know what the middle part of the 70s is like.
Boogie that, boogie that.
There you go.
Boogie that, boogie that.
And he ain't wearing no clothes.
Oh, yes, they call him The Streak.
Boogie that, boogie that.
Fastest thing on 2 feet.
Boogie that, boogie that.
He's just as proud as he can be. His anatomy, he gonna give us a peek.
So listeners, let us know how you're doing. You're playing along at home, yelling out your answers. Let us know if you're beating us, or send us an email. We'd love to, or give us some suggestions so we can have some of your matchups that you want.
Yep. Tell us where we're wrong. We take criticism well.
Yeah. So those were kind of some lesser known artists. Let's move into something big here. Let's have a little, right now, female boxing's red hot. There's female boxers all over the place. Ultimate Fighting has women fighters. So I was thinking a little kind of a women's matchup. I was thinking Pat Benatar versus Blondie, and Blondie's got the Deborah Harry as the lead singer there. I think this is a heavyweight matchup. What do you think, Brian?
Oh, yeah. Of the 70s and 80s female-led artists, this is very much a heavyweight matchup.
Okay, so listeners at home, who do you think? But then we'll have Brian go first because he's going to look up the numbers while I'm pontificating on my guess.
That's right. So Blondie was, I think, bigger in the 70s, but I would say Pat Benatar has more of the lasting power, and that Pat Benatar would be listened to more at this stage of, here we're looking back. Definitely a heavyweight matchup, just going off of one of the two that I've looked up.
So who was your pick?
Pat Benatar.
You're going Pat Benatar?
Just because I'm thinking that in the 70s it would have been Blondie, or 70s and 80s it would have been Blondie, but now it would be Pat Benatar.
I don't know. I thought Blondie really had the new wave kind of in the early 80s there. I think they're both early 80s. I'm going to go Blondie just because their songs, so she had Heart of Glass was huge, then Call Me, another big song, and then Rapture, which they kind of were the first group to put rap on the radio, even though it was kind of a silly rap song. One Way or Another, The Tide is High. So Blondie was on the Muppets also. So this is a tough one because they're both huge, but I'm going to go Blondie just because they have so many songs.
Now with Mac Davis, the Muppet Show did not have much of a bump, but I know with Pat Benatar, like Hit Me With Your Best Shot, Love Is a Battlefield, and Heartbreaker.
Love Is a Battlefield is such an underrated song. That song is just amazing.
Love is a battlefield.
We Belong, Heartbreaker, Fire and Ice, Shadows of the Night. Both these groups go on forever. So it's Hit Me With the Best Shot might be bigger for Pat Benatar, might be bigger than Heart of Glass for Blondie. But I think Blondie's got too many songs. I'm going to go Blondie, Brian.
All right.
Let's keep us out of the dark any longer. Let's go in for the final results here.
Final results are, Pat Benatar would have beat everyone so far combined with 5.2 million monthly listeners. Definitely a heavyweight category. But Blondie, doing better job with their Muppet Show appearance than Mac Davis did, has 12.6 monthly listeners. Blondie in a blowout. Blondie has more monthly listeners than all the other artists we've talked about so far combined.
Wow, Blondie knocking out Pat Benatar in the early rounds there. I did not see that coming. Pat Benatar, I mean, that's some great music there.
All right. Pat yourself on the back if you've got all three of them right, because both Mike and I right now are 2 for 3. I just had gotten the mail too when I came in, and I've got our promotional fee from, they sent some more loonies over from the Canadian Movie Crew and the Or Is It podcast. So this next boxing match of these 70s and 80s groups and how their Spotify listens are today is going to be brought to you by the Or Is It podcast from the Canadian Movie Crew. So we've been told by them that to be in Canada, we have to have like 1 out of every 3 episodes has to have some Canadian content. So I'm going to really try to work myself into a pretzel to get some Canadian content in here. So the Or Is It question is going to be, of these Australian bands that were formed in the 1970s but didn't have any widespread success until the 1980s, one of them was introduced to the North American market by being really popular in Western Canada and having a top song on a Winnipeg radio station a year after they released these songs in Australia, but a year before they hit big on the pop charts in the United States. So, is it Men at Work, or is it Midnight Oil? And this comparison is brought to you by Mark and Derek from the Canadian Movie Crew and their podcast, Or Is It?
Or is it?
What movies are we talking about?
Or is it the long-lost series ending to The Office?
Or is it why your exes should stay exes?
Find out on the Or Is It movie podcast.
Or is it the Lego movie version for Crayola?
Or is it how not to attract beautiful deaf women?
We're on Spotify, Apple iTunes, and everywhere you get your favorite podcasts.
Or is it Shared Groundhog Day?
Or is it Titty Bouncy, the movie?
And I know the answer to this, so I'll let you be the one that has to answer it. Is it Men at Work that kind of got the North American break by being played a lot in Western Canada, or is it Midnight Oil?
Okay, Brian. This one kind of we're going to call this kind of a light middleweight. So Midnight Oil, Beds Are Burning was a huge song. And then, they have some other songs, The Dead Heart, Blue Sky Mine. I'm kind of calling these guys a one-hit wonder. I know they had a bunch of other songs, but here in America, they just played Beds Are Burning. That was kind of a huge song.
Funny, when I search for Midnight Oil on Spotify, everything that comes up in my search history is Midnight Rider. I wonder why that is.
Okay, and then we have Men at Work. When they kind of came out in the early 80s, they were kind of supposed to be the Beatles, the new Australian Beatles. I mean, they had Down Under, which huge hit. Who Can It Be Now was also really big. And I liked some of their lesser songs like It's a Mistake and Be Good Johnny. I really liked those songs.
All right, I'm definitely going with Men at Work with the Who Can It Be Now and Down Under. And yeah, Beds Are Burning was a very late 80s song, and they had a little bit of a flair there kind of into the late 80s, early 90s, and then they kind of fizzled out. I'm also, for the listener at home that's wondering what the answer is to the Or Is It question, the Or Is It question is which of these two groups, Men at Work or Midnight Oil, got their springboard to North American success by having a song be really popular in Western Canada to kind of then open the floodgates to having success in the United States. The following year then, after having the song perform really well in Canada, and especially in the Winnipeg area, they then the next year burst on the scene in the United States.
I think the Beds Are Burning kind of sounds like it could almost be like a Rush song, so I'm going to say Midnight Oil, The Beds Are Burning.
And you would be incorrect.
Oh, bummer.
Who Can It Be Now, which was released in 81 in Australia, really hit it big in May of 1982 in Western Canada. And then that it hit really big in the United States. I think they had their first #1 hit then in June of 83 the following year. So the answer to the Or Is It podcast question, where they sent us some loonies, is Men at Work. And then that's also my guess for who would win this fight. What we call it, cruiserweights or light heavyweight.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a light heavyweight. Okay, so you got Men at Work beating Midnight Oil, the two M groups.
Yes.
I'm going to go with Men at Work. Like I said, Down Under, Who Can It Be Now? And then Don't Sleep on the Songs, It's a Mistake, Be Good Johnny. I like those songs also. So let's find out, Brian. Listeners at home are guessing right now.
All right. So the totals on the board are in. Midnight Oil would be a perfect matchup with Sam and Dave. They come in at 2.9 million monthly listeners, but Men at Work would be in a death match with Blondie because they also have 12.6 million monthly listeners, the same as Blondie.
Holy smokes. Wow.
These are definitely light heavyweight.
Both these groups went way higher than I thought.
Who knew, right?
Yeah, they were both surprisingly. All right, Brian, should we get to the main event now?
Yeah, let's get to the main event. I think Men at Work can thank those, Western Canadian residents in 1982 for winning this battle.
All right, Brian, now let's get to the main event.
This is the final match. All right, so Kenny Loggins has dropped off the baggage that was known as I can't remember what his name was. It like Bruce Messina or something? I don't know. Mike Messina, the pitcher from the Orioles.
This is like when George Michael got rid of Andrew Rigby when he was Wham, and he went to be George Michael by himself. He had to drop off that extra baggage. Yeah,
that's right. When Paul Simon got rid of that dead weight Art Garfunkel.
Oh, bringing the controversy.
We don't shy away from the controversy here at the 70s versus 80s podcast.
Art Garfunkel was a musical genius, Brian. How dare you?
Right. Yeah. He's the Ringo Starr of that.
Okay, so let's not hold it off any longer. This is our heavyweight match. This is our main event. As you said, Kenny Loggins, he's a little tired, but he's coming back. It's Kenny Loggins versus Phil Collins. Why don't you go ahead and give your answer, Brian, so you can look him up here. And then I got a lot of thoughts on this.
Absolutely. So we talked about Kenny Loggins recently. He got a big push from the 70s versus 80s podcast talking about yacht rock in a recent episode. He said he's kind of the John Williams of poppy movie scores with Caddyshack.
I'm All Right.
Yeah, the song in Caddyshack, the song in Footloose, and yeah, I'm All Right in Caddyshack, Footloose, and Top Gun. Well, Phil Collins, in our early podcast years, Mike on the mic, Wolfman Mike, never missed a chance to drop that drum bit from Phil Collins.
Wait, I hate to interrupt you, Brian, but Phil Collins is climbing into the ring right now. And he slipped on the rope and he's falling down. Oh, Phil. I think he's all right. I think he's okay.
All right. So Phil Collins has that British following. Kenny Loggins has the movie following. I think it's going to be a great heavyweight fight. I'm actually going to lean, even though I'm really confident our listeners would have given Kenny Loggins a bump after listening to our Yacht Rock episode. I'm going to go with Phil Collins.
All right, Brian. I'm glad we're talking this out. This will give our listeners a chance to guess who they're going for. This is a true heavyweight match. I think Phil Collins has his number one song has got to be In the Air Tonight that we just played the little snippet of there, the drum solo with that famous drum solo. I think that's bigger than any song we're talking about tonight. I think that's the biggest song. And then he's got a ton of other songs. Another Day in Paradise. I don't really care for that one. Against All Odds from the movie Against All Odds. Do you think we'll ever talk about the movie Against All Odds on here, Brian? Maybe when we get to episode 757, maybe. I still don't think we will.
Yeah, I don't think it's looking that good.
And then he's got One More Night. He's got Studio, Easy Lover, You Can't Hurry Love. So Phil Collins goes deep. The problem is he's going against Kenny Loggins, and Kenny Loggins has those soundtrack movies. You know, he has the yacht rock songs. You know, This Is It with Michael McDonald. But then he's got the soundtrack movies, and soundtrack movies carry so much weight. I mean, we're talking about heavyweights here. Those songs just carry so much weight. So he's got, I'm All Right by Caddyshack, which is an amazing song. Then he's got Footloose, and I can't remember the name. Oh, yeah, it's called Footloose. And that song, I heard that song too much, but that song is uber popular. And then he's got Highway to the Danger Zone from Top Gun. And then he's got Meet Me Halfway from, remember that movie, Brian? The arm wrestling movie?
Over the Top.
Over the Top. How can we forget about Meet Me All Way by Over the Top? Do you think he's more proud of being in that movie than the other three? Probably not.
Yes. That's the first line on his resume.
So we have an uber popular song in the Air Tonight by Phil Collins, and then he's got that big body of work. And then we got Kenny Loggins coming with the All Those soundtrack, which, soundtrack movies carry so much weight. People just think about them so much more. But I'm going to agree with you, Brian. I'm going Phil Collins. Phil Collins was quietly the man in the 1980s. He was just everywhere. So I'm going Phil Collins, and let's see the results.
All right, results. So Kenny Loggins started out with the lead in this fight. Footloose has just shy of 1 billion streams on Spotify. It's got 180 million more. I take that back. 160 million more than In the Air Tonight. So
no way.
Kenny Loggins has the most popular song by 160 million.
Shame on people. That's a travesty.
However, when you go to monthly listeners, it's a blowout. Phil Collins, 22.4 million. He's got the most listens of anyone in this contest by over 9 million. And Kenny Loggins just came in at 8.9 million. So Kenny Loggins wouldn't have even beat
wow,
Men at Work or Blondie.
Kenny underperforming.
Yeah, maybe that's our fault. We didn't do as good enough job on the Yacht Rock episode singing the praises of Kenny Loggins as we should have. But he got waxed by Phil Collins. Phil Collins climbing up to the top rope with the heavyweight championship belt of the 70s versus 80s podcast. Are you still relevant today? Match, and is he maybe going to slip? I don't know. We'll see if
Phil is so excited. He's going to come bounding out of the ring, and he's coming. Oh, watch out, Phil! He's coming down the stairs. Oh, he got a little too excited there. I can't believe it. That song with playing with the boys. That song they played on Top Gun when they're playing the slow motion sweaty volleyball game, and they had Kenny Loggins playing that song, Playing with the Boys. I can't believe. Okay, actually, I guess I can't believe that song didn't put him over the top. Yeah,
I think we understand.
That's a very disturbing song. So, all right, that was our first ever heavyweight matchup. So, the Spotify game. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the 70s versus the 80s. Keep it classy, my fellow babies. Yes, I can't believe I'm playing this song either, but I promised I'd play the most popular song we talked about tonight, even if it's this song. I would like to thank Brian Malika for co-producing this episode. Of course, Brian Malika was produced by watching every single after-school special and never shedding a tear once.
When we're going to all go, 3 of us, we're going to go outside at the same time. We got down to the landing where the shoes were, and there were 3 identical pairs of New Balance cross-training shoes. All of us have the exact same model number. We had to go by size to figure out who is whose. So